Good morning. You're listening to Legal Issues of the Day. We have today, I'm Attorney Nathaniel Lee, your host, and we have our superstar panel today. We have Attorney Milton Grimes, who represented Rodney King, which was the beginning of recording of police misconduct, and our crack research analyst, Attorney Vanita Banks, Masters in Tax, cyber security expert. So we going to be talking about police misconduct issues today. We had the senseless beatdown of Tyree Nichols down in Memphis, Tennessee, and terrible tragedy in American history. But as a point of beginning, though, there's one thing that I need to make clear. Milton and I know have done a number of these cases over the years, but this case represents a point of departure in terms of police investigation of its own folks. Here, the city of Memphis released unedited video of the misconduct. I've never seen that before. I've investigated a lot of these cases. And in our city, I could tell you that they conceal the evidence in almost most of the cases. They don't release the evidence right away. They fight over it. They alter the evidence. And in case after case, what I see is when they investigate themselves is a shot investigation. And I have evidence to prove that on a number of cases. And so the Tyree Nichols case is tragic. We see this too often. We see it happening all the time. And we see it happen to African-American males and females, like Sandra Bland, of course, down in Texas, but it happens too much. And so, having said that, Attorney Grimes, can you hear me? Are you connected now? Okay. What I'll do, hold on one second. And what has occurred is that we see a complete lack of investigation in these cases. And the net result is when the police misconduct occurs, and I was texting my minister this morning, we had a case here in India, Indianapolis, that really bothered me. A gentleman named Jeff Tyson. He was murdered by the Indianapolis Police Department, Vanita. Jeff Tyson was shot 49 times in the back, probably about 100 bullets entered his body, but 49 was in his back. It happened at 71st and Georgetown. And if you look at the newspaper report, it gives a rendition of facts that are just fundamentally false. It's claimed that Jeff Tyson shot at a police officer at 71st and Georgetown, and the store manager saw the shooting, and that he then proceeded to shoot out the car at police officers, striking one of the officers. We had the governor then, who was Mike Pence, say, this is the tragic circumstances a dangerous officer face every day. Well, I actually went and pulled a video, and what it showed was the officer shot inside the car. His spouse jumped out of the car, he pushed out of the car, and he took off. They started shooting at him. The officer who got shot, he got shot in the foot, which means that he shot him on himself. He shot himself in the foot, and they claim, because Tyson couldn't have shot through the motor of the car and hit him in the foot. So that's what we see in these cases. And so when you see the newspaper report of these cases, in every case that I've investigated, the information given to the press here locally has always been false. Not in a single case has it been accurate. And so when I saw this Tyree Nichols case, I saw that the city of Memphis released unedited video. I clapped my hand. I've never seen that before. I know Milton, can you hear me okay, Milton? Apparently can't. Vanita, Attorney Banks, when I look at these cases, I just never seen anything like this. Did you get a chance to watch the video of this beatdown and murder of this young man?
Absolutely. I watched the video, and I agree with you wholeheartedly that what is unique about this case, although let me just go back and say, in general, for all of the rhetoric since George Floyd's death, and there have been some changes since George Floyd's death, that police killings of unarmed Black citizens, men and women, have increased, and that America simply has failed to act. We need federal legislation to prevent these kinds of killings. And if there's anything that may come out of this senseless killing of Tyre Nichols, perhaps this will be the tipping point toward American politicians moving to pass federal legislation governing police departments and the 800,000 police officers in this nation. The swift action taken in Memphis, as you say, Attorney Lee, is unprecedented. The unedited release of the video, the immediate or swift firing of the 5 officers, and the Memphis district attorney acting swiftly to bring criminal prosecution of these officers.
Well, the only thing that I thought was unusual, Attorney Banks and Grimes, this was all 5 of the officers were Black or African Americans, and they're part of this community-based policemen that were designed to reduce homicides in the city, Scorpion. But what they did was clearly brutal, and it was murder based on what I saw. But for the first time that I've seen, the FOP in Memphis came out against the officers even. I've never seen that before. No matter.
Have we heard?
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, Attorney Lee. Have we heard from the FOP yet?
Well, I saw, maybe it was in the middle of the night when I watched this on TV, it seemed like every agency also chimed in. Even the FOP said what they were doing wrong, at least a representative of FOP. I don't know whether that guy was FOP in Memphis, but last night about 3:30, I was watching this, there was an FOP representative. I don't know when that it was a Memphis FOP or just an FOP guy in general. And so I got to check the source, but normally in our city, no matter how egregious the misconduct of the officer, the FOP come to their assistance, no matter what they've done. Hey, Milton, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you clearly. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. What have you ever seen in all your years? I know Rodney King, did you get a chance to see that beatdown of Tyre Nichols? And they're making comparison between the Tyre Nichols case and the Rodney King case. And I saw some significant differences in the 2 cases. The biggest difference, of course, he died and King didn't die that night. He died later on, but he was beat down. The beating was pretty severe. But the thing that I thought that really bothered me was the fact that one of the police officers, while he was on the ground, kicked him, but he ran to kick him like he was kicking a football. And well, I'm not sure.
There are some differences in the Rodney King case and this case, and there are some similarities. We could all day point those differences and similarities out, but I think the basic similarity in all of them is that it shows that we haven't learned to treat, the police rather, has not fully learned to treat the citizens as human beings. They treat them as objects. And in some jurisdictions, we know they were trained to treat them as enemy combatants or objects. Back in Kentucky about 8 years ago, They were training officers to, with Hitler slogans, and training officers to look at a human being as an object so that they wouldn't feel guilty by killing that person. So we haven't gone far from the King days. We haven't gone far from that brutality instilled in police officers' mind that this is them and this is us, and we do what we want to individual. We're gonna keep having these Saturday morning discussions until we change the system. It's not gonna stop. Stop.
Stuff away, throw the same. Throw your straw away. That's all right. Throw that away. Throw your straw away. Then go. Good. Then go put your clothes.
Hello?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So it's to me, it's what is clear is that we haven't gotten there yet. We haven't gotten to selecting the right temperament of officers, training officers, educating officers, that this is a human being and they're out there to serve and protect our society, not to brutalize it or be Gestapos. They're out here to serve and protect. I think that the young man, Malcolm Gladwell, hit it pretty good in his latest book about talking to strangers and how officers are afraid. It didn't look like these officers were afraid, but they have an attitude towards people that we have to get rid of. You know, we got to get more educated officers, better trained officers, and maybe remove some of the weaponry from these officers so they're not so cowboyish when they approach people. But we got a long ways to go, or we're going to have another beat down and killing of a human being, especially a minority human being. And it's a culture in the police department that is still there. We haven't addressed that culture. So we can analyze this beating all we want, but it's not going to change a damn thing until we change our approach to policing and hire people who are better trained, educated, and more humanitarian. So that's what we got coming, folks. It ain't going to stop.
Well, Attorney Grimes, here's my problem. My problem in litigating these cases, teaching seminars, getting evidence, is that there is a consistent pattern of cover-up by the department. In all the cases I investigated here locally, there's blatant cover-up, mismanagement of evidence. So they fabricate stories to the news media in these police shootings, and it's just disgusting to me. In the Rodney King case, how aggressive were they in terms of moving the case forward towards misconduct of the offended officers? Did they immediately take action against the officer, or was there some delay? This action that they took.
There were 27 cops out there in the Rodney King case. And I said then, and I say now, all 27 should have been prosecuted to show the police department and show the public that we're going to punish officers who don't do their job. So you had 23 officers that stood by. Nobody was afraid of Rodney King. They lied and said that they thought he was a PCP crazed monster, but he didn't do anything to indicate that he was PCP crazed. When he laid down on the ground and surrendered, they should have handcuffed him. But what did they do? They told him, N-word, we're going to kill you. You better run. That's when you see that young man getting up to run. And they beat him down until he said, I give. That's what that was all about. So those other 23 officers in the King case should have been prosecuted. We just haven't done the job. What is that? There's a saying that if you keep doing the same thing and expect a different result, you must be crazy or something like that. So we keep letting these officers do this, and we punish a few of them when we catch them with the evidence we have in the King case and in this particular case. But the culture hasn't changed because you keep putting in people who ain't qualified to do policing and expect them to do policing.
Okay. So currently, Attorney Grimes and Lee, there is no psychological or other testing that's done for candidates for police officers?
Up in
Well, here's
Oakland,
the problem.
up in Oakland several months ago, they suspended 45 officers who had been hired, had been on the job for 5 years or so, who had not passed the psychological profile test, Vanita. They suspended them because they discovered, oh, they didn't pass the test. We got Looney over here and whoever over here. They did not pass this particular test showing that they were psychologically fit to be a police officer. So they had to, I think they suspended all of them and then had them to retest. Several of them have been rehired. Others did not make it. So if you got a test, apply the test. If you don't apply the test, you might as well not have the test. If you can get in because you went to Iraq or you went to Vietnam or you went to somewhere and you killed a bunch of people and you come back and you can have a minimum training to be a police officer, that's not hiring a qualified law enforcement officer. We got to change the culture of the vetting and hiring of police officers, and we got to pay them more. Maybe we need to pay them more money, attract more intelligent, qualified people. Until you change that approach to it, we're going to keep having these problems. I don't think you and I and Nate, if we were out there patrolling the streets, not me anyway, because I'm too old now, but if you had us out there patrolling the streets with our background, I don't think we would beat down unmercifully a human being like this. There's no joy in beating down a person like they did this young man. There was no reason to beat down King the way they beat him down with that baton and the taser. So we need more educated, more social-oriented people out there doing this police work. We don't need brutes out there doing this police work. And there are some psychological tests that can be applied to eliminate some of the brutes. Of course, in any system, some people will slip through, but damn, at least set up a system where we get more qualified people applying and taking this job.
Well, here's the problem, counselors. One of my friends went to the police academy. That's very important. And so they recorded the training section at the academy. The police officers here was trained to say, in particular shooting case, to say, always say, I was in fear of my life. So every time a police officer shoots a suspect, that's what they're going to say. They're going to say that magical word because that gives them the legal right to use deadly force, whether it's true or not. And so we have this problem now because that's the way they were being trained. And so the second part about that is what's unusual about the Memphis case, where I said earlier, is they released the evidence right away. I've never been able to get evidence like that right away, despite my extensive contacts, because they conceal the evidence. They conceal it, and you can't get to it right away. But let's go to line now. We'll deal with one of the callers. Caller, you have a question for us today about the police misconduct. Oh, did we lose him? Okay, I'll go to the next one.
No, he's still here.
Okay.
Yes, how you doing, Brother Nate?
Okay, yes.
Right. This Brother Motep, and hello to Attorney Grimes, and thanks. Also appreciate you. Now, I'll be brief. It was horrible. I watched. The funny thing about it is, Attorney Grimes, they took off their vest with the body cams on it, but they forgot the street cam is sitting right there. Street cam. The street cam video is the one that just shows the brutality of it all, because they took their vest off. Normally doing, and then the white cop too, he needs to be charged. I see 2 more sheriffs have been fired from that. But going to Attorney Grimes, if you can answer this when you get a second, and soon as I'm done. I was watching some on NPR about the history of the militarization of the police, and it was supposedly started by a former chief in L.A. in the 60s named Will Parker, who I guess who Daryl Gates learned from. And Will Parker is quoted saying, if you do not keep those blacks, when L.A. was being gentrified in the 60s with blacks moving in, and he subsequently brought in a lot of ex-military, a lot of Southerners to become police in L.A., and he was quoted as saying, if you don't militarize those black folks, and keep them in a militarized state, oh my God. And so that's an overarching theme that I think we have here. All the money that's given to them, all the weapons, it's not the training. It's not the training problem. It's to make them more lethal, and so they become more lethal. But what we got a problem here, Nate, and I'll finish with this, is that we got some black people in this town that's really off base to me. And we had someone that said Philando Castile put his hand on his gun in the Minnesota case and got killed. They also posit that the cop was acquitted, and so in Minnesota, that's not new because they did convict Derek Chauvin and everybody else. But Castile's case was 2017. Castile's case was 2017 before Floyd happened. But he's wrong because I'm reading from the Minnesota Star Tribune. Prosecutor Jeff Paulson highlighted autopsy evidence in his closing argument, reminding the jury of a bullet wound to what would have been Castile's trigger finger, and that there was no corresponding bullet damage nor wounds in the area of Castile's right short pocket, where he carried his gun. He also cited testimony from first responders who saw Castile's gun in his pocket as he was loaded onto the backboard. The Star Tribune also reported the jury wasn't allowed to have additional information it requested without the judge specifying why. Jury asked the court Friday to reread the officer's testimony in its entirety. Their second request for statements regarding Philando Castile, but Ramsey County District Court Judge William H. Leary denied the request without elaborating, stating that the reasons aren't important to share right now. The judges are part of this problem too. They're part of this problem too, but I wanted to clear Castile's name because someone wanted to put out here that Castile touched his gun and that's why he was shot, and the forensics show that that wasn't the case. But Attorney Grimes, give us a little history about Mr. Will Parker and Daryl Gates, if you don't mind. That was interesting what I learned about him. Thank you.
Well, excuse me, it wasn't just Parker in the 60s. It was Kentucky in the 2000s, training their officers from Hitler's statements and putting slogans of Hitler and some other races in the training of these officers, how you're to look at these people out here that you are patrolling and controlling and imprisoning. You look at them as if they are enemy combatants, so you have no emotion or compassion for them. But that's how they train. That's how some of those officers are still on forces around this country. So if you saw I said something about it some time ago, about 127 shots, the incident in 2011 in Cleveland, where you see 60 patrol cars or more following behind this brother and a sister in a car because his car backfired, and one officer said it was a gunshot, and another one said, oh no, that was just a backfire. But the one who said it was a gunshot coming out of that car, he started following him, and other cars started following him. And supposedly they followed that car for about 7 or 8 miles till the man pulled up into a schoolyard, and they let go with 127 shots. It's documented. It's on Netflix. You can see it. And they let go with 127 shots. And the one officer ran and jumped up on the hood of the car and shot 40-some times through the windshield to kill 2 people that didn't have a weapon in the car. And they tried him. He had a court trial. And you speaking of the judge, sir, I think it's Pierre, the judge found him not guilty because he said this officer feared for his life. So what kind of message is that telling law enforcement when you have the court system backing them up? Yeah, you get a few convictions here and there, but overall, officers know that if they say what Nathaniel said early, that they're trained to say, I feared for my life, that's supposed to be the key to the door. You can kill anybody you want and say, I feared for my life, no matter how horrendous the situation may look. So it's just not picking on these 5 officers who we caught. You know, I remember back in the Rodney King case, I refused to take the case when I was first called about it because I said, I don't have time to deal with this. Another brother saying the officers called him the N-word and beat him down, and he's on parole. I can't win. I don't have any evidence. But then when I saw the video, I'm going, oh, my God, let me have that case, please. So it's still the culture, y'all. it's still the trainers telling these young men and young people, this is the code of silence, and it's the code of brutality. You want to go home to your family that night, and everybody want to go home to their family. So that's
Well,
how
we've
I see it.
seen the militarization of the police goes back to the Reagan era war on drugs, when your programs were initiated to give surplus military equipment to police departments across our nation. And we've also seen in the aftermath of 9/11, the rise of what's called the quote, warrior cop. And I was just looking at an article which stated that, a small Illinois town, they terminated their park police. And at the time, they found that those police officers, had M16 rifles.
Yes, it's sad.
Yeah.
And so rather than to protect and serve, as you state, police officers are being trained to be warriors against the very citizens to whom they are hired to protect and serve. And we've forgotten all about the community policing model. And of course, during the Obama administration, he disseminated the 21st century police reform. It's a blueprint for a reform that needs to take place across the country. And Curtis Blow has an op-ed today, which says that, which is entitled Tyree Nichols' death is America's shame, because we failed to do what needs to be done. We need federal legislation that's consistent in police departments across our country. And the closest we got was, of course, the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. And I know that there were negotiations back and forth between Tim Scott, Republican Tim Scott, and Cory Booker was very involved in this work and this legislative effort as well. But they disagreed on the concept of qualified immunity. And so I'm just wondering, at this juncture, perhaps this senseless and heinous killing of Tyree Nichols can be the tipping point for federal legislation. And while I would love to have the qualified immunity defense eliminated, because as Nathaniel, as an expert, and Attorney Grimes as well, on this qualified immunity defense, as much as we need to eliminate that judicially created concept, perhaps at this point we can move forward with legislation that might not include it.
Well, hopefully, Mr. Go ahead, Nathaniel.
Yeah, one of the things that is imperative, so in order to cut back on these mass murders by police officers, one of the key elements is how they're investigated, right? There's no deterrence because they're protected by the FOP, they're protected by the mayors, they're protected by the departments. The one important piece of evidence that you must have in a police shooting case, if you don't have the cameras, if the number one thing, if you make it mandatory for each officer when they're performing an arrest, they must record it with their body cams. If you did that, and leave their cameras on their squad cars also on, right? That would be one level of protection. But the second one is that whenever an officer is involved with a shooting, this is very important, within 3 hours, not a day, within 3 hours, make it mandatory that you take a detailed videotape statement of the officer. You take him down to the department, you take a video statement where he describes in detail, he or she describes in detail what happened and give the biomechanics of the shooting itself. See, in every case where an officer is given a statement, I could win that case at trial because their statement will largely be inconsistent with physical evidence. You also need to have somebody other than his buddy conduct the investigation. So in these police shooting cases, the thing that I was applauding Memphis, they released everything. I've never seen that before. I don't know whether you've seen that, Milton, but I've not seen a police department release evidence in this fashion, ever.
No, it's not typical. I agree.
Yeah, but that would be my two things that I think are important in these police action shooting cases. Because see, what people don't realize is that when they kill somebody, the police officers themselves attend the autopsy. So in every police shooting in Indianapolis, the police investigators are in the room when they conduct the autopsy. So they collect the evidence, they conduct a physical inspection of the officer, they take statements, they look at the forensic evidence, so they control every part of evidence. In this town, folks, the police department regularly conceal material evidence. I'm not guessing about this. This is what I see all the time. I'm just sick of it. And so the point I'm making is that we need to have full disclosure in each town in America, like we've seen occur in Memphis. Based on what they did in Memphis, Tennessee, I would encourage people, I don't see why people are protest that, because the city did everything I think appropriate at this point. You had some rogue police officers doing some bad things. They've been arrested and charged with manslaughter already. And that's amazing. That's American justice system at its finest to me.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I'm hoping that Memphis can become the model of how the system should work in the future, because we're witnessing, from my perspective, the courageous leadership of Police Chief C.J. Davis. She moved incredibly swiftly to fire these officers and make the videos immediately available. And so this is the playbook. Hopefully this is a new playbook for how this is to happen. But first we want to stop these killings. We want to prevent these killings, because from my perspective, there's no reason why an individual citizen should be killed as a result of a traffic stop. Now, we've heard these terms used, but we haven't seen this footage, and I don't know if it's even available. And we heard this also, Attorney Grimes, in the Rodney King case, that both Tyree Nichols and Rodney King were, quote, driving recklessly. So I don't know what that means. There were, quote, two confrontations that the police officers reported, but it's clear from the videos that Tyree was beaten unmercifully, and that he was de-escalating the situation. That he was saying, what did I do? And I'm complying with what you're asking me to do. And so just totally brutal. And to your point, Attorney Lee, these rogue officers were just out of control. And from my perspective, the way that they acted so cavalierly, and I haven't heard that our caller stated that they took off their body cams, and I have not heard that yet. I do know that there were street cameras that collected some of this evidence as well. But this isn't the first time that they've acted in this way, right? I mean, this is how they've acted in so many situations. There was one person that's reported that he was treated, similarly recently as well. And so we'll see if there's additional evidence that will be developed that will suggest that this was these officers' normal mode of operation.
We have a caller
Well,
that's been hanging on for a long time, Pierre.
Hello? Are
Yes,
you there?
Pierre. Yes.
Okay. I'm not going to spend any time on Imhotep's comment. I'm the one who made the Philando Castillo comment, but I'm not going to waste any time on that. Here's the thing. First of all, I want to take Chief Geraldine Davis to task, Serlin Davis. Now, that Scorpion unit that was operating down there that stopped this young man, those types of units have to be supervised closely. And I didn't see not one sergeant stripe. I didn't see not one corporal stripe. I didn't see anything. And Milton will recall that type of unit is similar to the crash unit that they had operating in Rampart, back during that time that they eventually disbanded. Those specialized units have to be led by a commander or somebody, and somebody has to be on the scene, a sergeant or something, to control those type of operations. And so she gets no credibility for me. She gets no pass from me. Lack of supervision and lack of command is probably contributed to this whole thing. What I would like to see, Nate, and you and Milton and Attorney Vanita, y'all going to have to prepare these communities for a possible acquittal, because when they get in, when those defense attorneys walk those juries from when they stopped him and snatched him out of the car, and did he resist? Did he fight? I mean, this is a 150-pound man, and he was handling 5 cops, and he ran, and then they beat him when they caught up with him. But when you get a defense attorney that walks it, and they just might say, "Hey, this is brutal. This is what police work looks like." I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying y'all gonna have to prepare this community for a possible acquittal. And
Hey, Pierre.
where are they going to try this case?
Hey, Pierre, I'll make a bet with you 10-1 that those officers are going to be convicted. And here's why.
Well, they may be. But I'm saying if they get a tight attorney, they might get a hung jury. And
They're not going to get a hung jury.
Are they going to move that case, Nate?
Those officers are going to be tried there in Memphis in their county court system. They will be convicted. I'm pretty confident
sure
of that. Yeah, and here's why. Here's why they're going to be convicted. There are certain evidentiary things that are not admissible during a lot of trials under Rule 403 of the Rules of Evidence, right? And there are certain things that would get in. The evidence in this case that will get in is the videotaping of what they did. That's evidence has great probative value. And Pierre, no reasonable jury can conclude that that one officer who ran and kicked the guy on the ground while he's handcuffed could be acting in self-defense. No person, no human being, there were some acts that were so egregious that were shown on videotape that is shocking to the conscience. So the jury made it see that.
They were very egregious.
Now let me ask you something. if you're the officer, what would be your defense if you came up? Now, by the way, nobody ever said what the hell the crime was that he committed. It'd be a traffic offense, if anything, if he did that. We don't even know that he committed a traffic offense, right? Because their job when they pull him over to record it, right? So what I'm saying is the evidence was so graphic that what they did, and that evidence would be admitted. Like we talked about what happened in the other case where the judge did not allow certain evidence in. This evidence will come in because it's the evidence of the actual crime that's been produced already. Now you got to remember, the defendants and the lawyers for the victim saw the videotape before release to the public. So they've already complied with basic discovery rules by giving them a copy of the authentic tapes of what occurred. So therefore, that evidence be omitted. What I predict, here's my prediction, that one of those officers is going to take a plea agreement to avoid a quick length of prison sentence. Is going to write out everybody else.
Well,
so the first guy to take a deal, going to take the lightest sentence, and he's going to talk about everybody else. That's my prediction.
And you see that
I'm just playing devil's advocate.
I understand.
Well, I don't disagree with you, Pierre and Nate. I guess I've experienced the overwhelming evidence of guilt not being sufficient enough to convince two jurors who hung the case in light of videotaping of what happened, officer being fired, and he committed perjury, and he changed his story from fearing that this person was going to escape and beat them to death with their handcuffs. That didn't fly, so he changed it a week later when he was interviewed by Internal Affairs. Said, I thought she was reaching for a weapon because he found out she had a box cutter in her back pocket because she used that in her work. So I've seen these cops get up there and lie in the face of the video, and that's enough for a juror or two who firmly believe that these people were sent here by God to protect and serve us, and we're not going to convict them of a crime. You still have some stark supporters of law enforcement out there and some racists. So I'm not so 100% sure that these officers will be convicted, even though the evidence is overwhelming. And Pierre, as to your comment, these special units who have sergeants present to make sure things are done right. If you remember, it was a sergeant orchestrating the whipping of Rodney King. Sergeant.
I'm talking
King.
about the crash unit.
Okay,
not those
unit.
four.
I'm saying any unit, all units, they're composed of police officers, and being a sergeant does not necessarily eliminate you from participating in the attack. I've seen enough cases and read enough cases to know that sergeants don't always do what we expect them to do, and that is control their subordinates. They let them and they participate in these killings and in these whippings because they're part of the mob. So
there are a lot of criticisms regarding these types of units, including the one here in Chicago that was disbanded because they can become very, very corrupt and rogue, quite frankly. And our caller makes a fair point regarding appropriate supervision. And Attorney Grimes, I hear your point regarding how, sergeants and others in leadership can be, just as brutal. I think that with respect to the charges, okay, well, let's take Chauvin's conviction, for example. He was convicted because of the video evidence, which we all saw, with our own eyes, how he stood on the back of George Floyd for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I think that the prosecutors, while the parents were urging that these officers be charged with murder, that they have been charged with manslaughter, which is a lesser charge, but a knowing killing. They've also been charged with assault and what might seem to be an innovative theory or creative theory, kidnapping, which suggests to me that there is no probable cause, for the stop in the first place.
Quickly.
Go ahead.
To your point, Attorney Banks, and I'll get off of the phone. In Milton City, LA, crash unit eliminated. In your city, Chicago, that specialized unit eliminated. When they put that unit together down in Memphis, who's looking at best police practices? That chief. And when those defense attorneys get through with her, they will eviscerate her. That's what my prediction is. But thank you for taking my call. But she's responsible for that unit. And they were proud of that unit when it was down there helping reduce crime and fighting drugs. Now she threw it under the bus. She's responsible for that unit. Thank you for taking my call.
Hey, one quick caller. We're going to take Troy now. Troy, you got a quick question or comment for us? Oh, producer, put Troy on, please. Okay, did we lose him? He's been holding for a long time. Yo, Troy, you got a question or comment for us?
No. Can you talk about Chicago purge law, where letting crime run amok, and how Indiana, because they had 2 killings not too long ago, just like that or worse. Killed a guy while he was sleeping in his driveway because he had a gun in his lap. He was asleep. They shot him 13, 14 times, and they went into one guy's house and beat him twice, and suffocated and killed him. Why is it that nothing in Indianapolis, Indiana, is not getting exposed like all other cities? Who controls this city?
Well, that's a very good point. I agree with the caller. And here's the problem, caller, particularly here in Indianapolis, as to why these things don't get more publicity. The police department, our chief, does not release the evidence of these shootings. So, in other words, you've never seen the city of Indianapolis do what they did in Memphis. I've been doing this over 40 years, and they've never released evidence that shows misconduct of the officers immediately like that in the cases I've reviewed. So that's what's odd about the Memphis case, and that's why I'm applying them. They release all the evidence right away. Here in Indianapolis, the shooting that you're talking about, what the police officer going to do, they did not have the body cam on. They're going to say they were in fear of their life because the guy had a gun at him, right? And it's going to be, and then here's the sad thing about it. The first officer going to say, I saw a gun, and he yelled gun. So when he yelled gun, the other 2 officers that shoot, relying on what he said, they get kicked out on qualified immunity. So you got the one officer who goes to trial, and he said, I was in fear of my life. And you take the typical judge now in federal court, a lot of times they grant summary judgment on qualified immunity on that issue. So it's because they do not produce the evidence right away, in the typical case, we fight over it, we ask for it, and we get it 1.5 years later. Despite court orders and pleadings and things like that, it's an uphill battle just to get the evidence. And that's why the body cams are so important now, because they give you evidence of probative value or forensic evidence right away that shows what occurs. So when you get these type shooting, I spend somewhere between $20,000 to $100,000 to collect evidence by itself to prove the case. And that's the troubling part about it. In this case here in Memphis, they released the evidence right away. And that's what I was applying them on. And and that's a distinction. And I just respond to Milton. Here's one thing that's unique about this case. The murderers in this case are African-Americans, police officers. And when you do these jury trials, that trial looked like it may be tried in Memphis unless they get a change of venue. But they get a change of venue, they're not going to get a county that necessarily going to be favorable to these guys, in my opinion. I mean, because when they show the video footage of them, the evidence in a lot of these cases is overwhelming. But the one thing that you generally don't have is clear video evidence like you see in this case. I know in the Rodney King case, they had the one video camera that they dissected Milton. Here, you have what, like 5, 6 different camera angles on this crazy stuff occurring. And I predict that one of those cops going to take a plea bargain. I suspect that one guy they're going to come to and offer plea, and he's going to take it to get a reduced sentence. That's my prediction. That's the kind of way the justice system works now. What do you think?
I think that it's fine that they release the evidence right away. But the more important thing to me is they need to deal with the culture of law enforcement and change this culture. Releasing evidence after the fact, yeah, that's all well and good. You know, you got 5 black officers, they're disposable. You can throw them away and look good. You need to change this internal culture of law enforcement from captains or chiefs on down to the desk sergeant or the desk officer. And until we change this culture, we're going to have these cases. That's what I think.
Wow. Attorney Bank, one last comment.
I agree with Attorney Grimes that the culture definitely has to be changed, because I just don't understand, you know, what is the deterrent? In the aftermath of George Floyd's killing, we're continuing to see these kinds of police killings and murders increase. And from my perspective, the time is now for Congress to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act.
Well, we're at the end of our show now, but I'd like to thank all the callers for calling today, but I need to make an announcement. Earlier this week, I interviewed Ken Falk, who is the chief litigator in the Indiana abortion. Ken Falk is a skilled litigator for the ACLU, and he successfully seemed to win all these constitutional arguments, but he got a temporary injunction on the abortion bill here in Indiana under the First Amendment of Indiana Constitution. He made a really phenomenal argument, and the Supreme Court took the case under advisement. So based on the argument, he may win that case because he made some good points, but you'll be able to hear the entire interview. Go to our YouTube channel. We will post it today after the show. And also, we will also post it on our Facebook. Next week, my partner, Marsha Kowski, will be talking about Social Security and workers' comp. So join the show next week also to learn the developments in Social Security and things like that. And again, I'd like to thank our callers and our special guests. Attorney Grimes, his case is back in the news again, the Rodney King case. That was the beginning of videotape evidence, and it's still with us today, but thank God it's gotten a lot better than we did back then. And I'd like to thank Attorney Banks. I know she did a lot of work on both cases, and I'd like to thank you, the audience, and especially people in our radio land, and continue to support us as we get past our 100,000 listeners this week. Thank you all, and I'll talk to you in 2 weeks. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.